Don't adjust your screens. This is a takeover. Donald Kendall back in the house. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. Is America quickly shifting from a nation of property owners to a nation of renters? In this episode, we're going to expose the growing forces behind the decline of home ownership, from skyrocketing prices to corporate consolidation of housing. How is this trend impacting society and the political landscape? Plus, we dive into another urgent emerging issue, the rise of central bank digital currencies and what that means for your financial freedom. We're going to be talking about all this and more on episode 502 of the In the Think podcast. Oh, no, just kind of shut off kind of quickly there. Yeah. Well, welcome to the In the Tank podcast. Today, I am your host, Donald Kendall. Please don't unsubscribe from this because you're looking for Linnea Lucan. She'll be back next week. This isn't a permanent change. We just hijacked the show. So this is a special episode. Linnea is off traveling. She's doing some pretty high-level, cool stuff that I'm sure they'll talk about maybe on tomorrow's Climate Realism show if you tune into that. And Jim is off gallivanting somewhere or another. So Justin Haskins and I are taking over the show. Justin, how are you doing today, good sir? Senior fellow at the Emerging Issues Center. It's been a while since you've been on the show. What's going on?
I was doing well until I had to come on the show, and then just ruined my day. I'm also very sad because I don't know if you've heard the news, but big news coming out today. The Senate has voted to pull funding from PBS and NPR.
Oh,
so we are now one vote away from no more communist television and radio. It's almost happened. And I'm really sad about it, honestly. I mean, how will we live without whatever the hell they put on PBS because nobody watches it? How will we possibly live?
Sesame
I don't know.
Street, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is that even still on? I have no idea. I mean, isn't there like 10,000 episodes of Sesame Street? Can't we just have kids watch reruns? The other thing that's amazing about that is like I was reading an article today about the funding and all this other stuff, and it's like the federal funding for this is like a tiny fraction of how much money they bring in. They bring in tons and tons of money from
viewers like
donors.
you.
Yeah, like people donate money. I don't know who these psychopaths are, but they donate money to PBS. And like they also get money from all sorts of other things. And so it's actually not that big of a deal, even for their budget. But oh my God, the media is just, they're going to be holding funeral processions for Big Bird in the streets.
Yeah.
It's going to be, it's tragic. It's tragic, really. So
you know what? I think we should scrap all the other topics and just dedicate this hour to talking about Elmo and what have you.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's a ton going on. We've got a bunch of topics. As you can see by our cool graphic sidebar over to the side here, we're going to be talking about the Genius Act, CBDCs, ESG and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and the idea of whether or not we're becoming a nation of renters. Because remember, in the future, you'll own nothing and you'll like it, right? seems like a threat almost. But before we get into any of those topics, Justin, I was kind of hesitant to bring this up because I just feel like this is going to just open up the floodgates to a whole lot of different things. But considering the news cycle and the what's trending on Twitter, like, how are we not going to talk about the Epstein?
Forget it, Donnie. You're out of your element.
That's right. Despite what, Donald Trump wants us to talk about or wants us to not talk about, it almost would seem silly if we didn't at least address this a little bit. So before we get into, any of the other topics, before I get into the details of all of this, I should say, I want people to sound off in the comments. Fire in some comments, what you think about all of this Epstein stuff. Do you think that there's some sort of cover-up going on? Do you think that this is a hoax, some sort of nothing story? Do you think this is a distraction from more important things? I'm very curious of what you have to say about this Epstein story, because this one, especially if you're on Twitter, it just seems like we've become so tribal, not only just like left versus right, but even when it comes to like specific things. Justin, you and I have been in chat group texts with people that have very strong opinions about this. I don't know if maybe we
and not the ones that you probably think if you're watching.
No, probably
not the ones
not.
you probably think.
Yeah. So but anyways, so Jeffrey Epstein, arrested 2019, federal charges for sex trafficking minors, has ties to some of the most powerful people in the world. Then just weeks later, supposedly kills himself in federal custody. Since then, the story has been a lightning rod for speculation, conspiracy, and, I think justified suspicion at the very least. This week, the saga took a weird turn when President Trump on Truth Social essentially told everyone to move on. He even said those obsessing over Epstein were playing into the Democrats' hands, and that he doesn't even want their support if they're so fixated on this Epstein stuff. So what's going on here? Is there really nothing to see? Is there some sort of cover-up? Is it more complicated than what it seems like on the surface? So before I get your comments on this, Justin, I don't want to really spend a whole lot of time on this because we do have some other very important stuff to talk about. I do want to go through just little bullet points of this saga, because it's the idea that a group of elites conspire, partake in horrendous acts, and then get away with it. It's antithetical to justice, the rule of law, all of that sort of stuff. And the idea that we have people in power that are finally the people that are in a position to expose and bring this corrupt and disgusting people to justice is unique and fleeting. And it would be incredibly cathartic if some of these people were marched in handcuffs, right? So the idea that the political elites are partaking in disgusting acts like these alleged in these conspiracies has been a thing for decades at this point. In 2008, Epstein had the sweetheart deal where he was convicted on underage prostitution charges. Instead of having the book thrown at him, he got a pretty lenient plea deal. There's all the flight log stuff showing very powerful people taking Epstein's private jet to the island. That Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested with Epstein back in 2019. She was convicted in 2021 for trafficking minors to, nobody, apparently. During Epstein's death in federal custody, there was broken cameras, sleeping guards, a whole lot of stuff that just kind of made that seem like kind of a weird story. And then also, and I totally forgot about this until I was doing research for this segment, there was a Project Veritas clip that came out after, do you remember this, Justin? Project Veritas clip after the arrest, where ABC's Amy Robach complained that they had this huge story about Epstein years ago, and that she was pressured by Buckingham Palace and the ABC studio to squash the story. So this is just scratching the surface. I mean, we could do an hour on just the Epstein conspiracy if we wanted to. But what makes it all worse to me, Justin, is that we had people like Kash Patel going around prior to the election talking about how the Epstein files needed to be released day one when he got into office. And they even made a big deal out of releasing those phase one binders to all of those, what are they, conservative influencers or whatever they called them a few months ago. But now nothing to see here. Go away. Stop asking. So, Justin, what's your thought on this?
Well, I think the biggest, I think there's so much we don't know. What I'd like to do is start with something that we absolutely know for sure, and that is none of this makes any sense. It's
Right.
all nonsensical. Like no matter what theory you think is going on, the recent reaction to the way that they've handled this in the Trump administration makes no sense. Like it just none of it makes any sense. I suppose you could say it makes sense if Donald Trump is somehow implicated or some top level person in the administration is implicated and they're all just trying to sweep it under the rug. But really, when you think about it, that doesn't make any sense because Democrats had this under the Biden administration. They had this information for years.
Yeah.
And does anyone really believe that if there was something even remotely damaging to a Republican in there, that wouldn't have found its way out? Like, of course it would have. I mean, literally, they were inventing conspiracy theories to get rid of Donald Trump. They were trying to put him in jail for crimes that no one had ever been prosecuted for in history. So, of course, if there was something in there, they would go after Trump. They would go after Trump, people tied to Trump during the election. At the very least, they would have done that to hurt him. So, I mean, that makes no sense. The idea that they opened it up and then they just didn't find anything. Okay, maybe that's the case, but then why not just release everything then? I mean, what? And why call everybody stupid for saying this doesn't make any sense? Why release a videotape of the prison, the floor where Epstein was being kept, where he supposedly killed himself, and say that this helps, prove the theory that he did actually kill himself when the video doesn't actually show Epstein's cell? Why say that the video proves it when the video's missing a minute? And they knew the video was missing a minute. And say that, well, there's no way that anyone came in there and killed him. Why? There's a minute missing. We don't know. And it doesn't show his cell anyway. Why would they do that? Why would they produce binders and blindside a bunch of influencers at the White House? Did not know when they went to the White House that this was going to happen to them. Give them these binders, call them the Epstein files, and then send them off into the media when there's nothing in them. Like, no matter what theory you believe here is going, none of this makes any sense. So at bare minimum, I think what we can say very clearly is that the way the Trump administration has handled this from beginning to end in the second term has been catastrophic. Just absolutely catastrophic, totally ridiculous. And the worst of it is the way that Donald Trump has handled the reaction to people saying, what? Like, after all these years of you talking about it, Donald Trump, and your son talking about it, and Kash Patel talking about it, and Pam Bondi talking about it. These are all the most important people. The head of the FBI, the head of the Department of Justice, the president of the United States, the children of the president of the United States, the assistant director of the FBI, they're all saying that something is there, and then all of a sudden, there's nothing there, and you're all idiots for talking about it, wasting your time. Oh, and by the way, it's a Democrat conspiracy theory now, suddenly. Right. Like, this is the worst handling. I truly, I don't want to be I'm being really critical of Trump. I know that, but it's like, I cannot think of a president shooting himself in the foot worse than this. Now, is it fatal? Is this going to somehow take down? No, of course not. But it is really stupid. Like, it is a really, really stupid strategy. And that, I think, at bare minimum, no one can deny that. This is a catastrophe, the way they're handling it.
Yeah, so this conspiracy, if all the Epstein allegations and all of what we suspect and the certain people that are involved or whatever is actually the case, then like I really feel like there's so much probably going on behind the scenes with all of this in like a Game of Thrones sort of way that like us plebes will never know the full truth of everything that's going on. So I don't know, like I'm just gonna like sit back and wait and see what happens, because I truly don't know who's got what maneuverings going on and what's being planned or whatever. But yeah, the idea that there's like this much smoke and like, no, there's no fire, and you're insane to think that there's fire is like almost insulting to me.
Well, when they were the ones saying there was fire. So it's like, oh, there's fire and there's fire. Like, we got to do something about the fire. And then we're like, hey, why haven't you done anything about the fire? And they're like, oh, there's no fire. And it's like, well, you told us there was fire and there's still a bunch of smoke. And now you're saying there's no fire. We can see the smoke. Oh, you're an idiot. Why? What? You're so stupid. What, you a traitor? You hate us because you say there's a fire? It's like, it's the dumbest strategy. Even if they just, there's nothing there, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to release anything for whatever reason, why didn't they just come out and say, hey, guys, there's nothing there, I don't really want to talk about it, it's all done, just let it go, which is initially how they handled it. But why would you ever transition into, you guys are basically no longer my supporters, and like, you know, you're basically traitors to the MAGA movement, and you guys are obsessed and stupid, and this is all BS, and like, why would you ever go there? Ever?
I don't know. I don't know. You know, Donald Trump, like, sorry, like, you know, if you don't want my support, you still have it for the most part. But I am still gonna get my yarn and do my little conspiracy, you know, pin. Well, a pin board.
One last thing before we move on, because we didn't mention this at all. One of the most underrated parts of all of this, which people are not really paying that much attention to because of all the Trump stuff all the stuff he's saying. But Democrats are now suddenly all in on the Epstein conspiracy.
Right.
They now say it is a conspiracy and that Trump is hiding something because he's maybe on the list. It's like, you guys had the list. What are you talking about?
For years.
Had it for years. It's just like, we live in our politicians are truly the worst. They are the worst. They're so bad. And then they wonder why we don't trust them when they're like, no, guys, believe us. It's like, why? Why would we believe any of you? You constantly change your stories and lie all the time. And this is just another example of how absurd all of it is.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, like, the Epstein story hit a nerve, like, for a reason. Like, it resonated with people. People were curious. You know, like I said, it kind of gets at that, like, core of making sure, like, justice is being doled out to even the people at the highest levels, right? So all of this, like, potentially confirms, like, you know, suspicions that people have. Like you said, like, the kind of the strategy about trying to, like, just, like, get around this topic or whatever, it seems to, like, confirm the suspicions that people have about elites and corruption, that the justice system doesn't seems to, you know, bend when it comes, you know, up against, like, the people that are in power, all of that sort of stuff. So, you know, I just feel like at some point we need some sort of answers on this, some sort of insight and transparency on this. But, you know, we'll see what happens. You know, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But we got to move on to some other more policy related emerging issue topics. So this topic is something that you've probably never heard of. I don't think that we've ever talked about this on In the Tank before. I don't think that there's been much written about this outside of a few things that Justin personally has done. But this story revolves around the Genius Act that is being touted as a piece of legislation that seeks to regulate stable coins, setting up the United States as a center of innovation when it comes to this industry. However, there is a lot more going on with this story, so much so that our very own Justin Haskins co-authored an article with Glenn Beck about this, titled, "Is the Genius Act a Backdoor to Authoritarian Digital Dollar?" Now, before I have Justin explain the Genius Act and some of the stuff that he's reading into it, I should briefly mention for any new listeners why the digital dollar is something to fear. So a central bank-backed digital currency, unlike Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, is a government-issued and fully programmable thing. This means that every transaction could be tracked, frozen, or even blocked in real time. If the wrong political party is in power, or even the wrong bureaucrat, your money could be turned off at the push of a button for any political reason, whether it's combating climate change, trying to fight back against gun violence, social justice, anything, really. And this isn't theoretical. We've seen similar tactics already used in countries around the world, including places like China or even Canada during those infamous trucker protests. So a CBDC isn't just digital, it's controllable, and that is where the danger lies. So we were actually really highlighting these threats of the CBDC for a while, especially during the Biden administration, where we were doing some work on this specifically. But then when Donald Trump came into office, it was like, all right, well, it seems like this is going to be dead in the water for at least the next 4 years. Then enter the Genius Act, which again, just from when you're reading like the description on like, congress.gov or whatever, it seems like a pretty innocuous thing. It's like stable coins, cryptocurrency regulations, like whatever. But then Justin calls me up on the phone and explains to me why this could be a backdoor towards something resembling a CBDC. Justin, care to explain what's under the hood of the Genius Act?
Right. So the center of the Genius Act is the idea of stable coins. So stable coins are blockchain based kind of cryptocurrency that is tied to something that's stable. That's why they're called stable coins. So they're pegged usually, well, the ones that we're concerned about with this piece of legislation are pegged to the dollar. Okay. So essentially the way it would work is you could take dollars and you could turn them into a stable coin that is worth, one stable coin is worth $1. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but that's the way a lot of them work. So Tether is a really famous stable coin, widely used. Another one is USDC coin. These things are coins that have been used now hundreds of billions of dollars and people are using it all over the world. And essentially, like I said, it's a way of using dollars on cryptocurrency platforms and payment processing systems and things like that without actually having to use physical dollars or even digital dollars. Now, why would you want to have anything like this? Well, because if the way the banking system works today, if you want to transfer money to somebody else, it doesn't happen instantaneously, especially if you want to do it across borders or things like that. If you want to move money around between accounts, it takes time. There's processing time. There's all of these different international systems like SWIFT and other things that dollars have to run through. So the banking system is still, obviously moves a lot faster than it used to, but it's still pretty cumbersome compared to cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies, you can just send to people almost instantaneously. They get it. So the advantage is if you want to move money quickly, you can move money quickly and securely using stable coins. So a lot of people already use stable coins, but the problem with stable coins is that they're not really historically regulated very closely or at all in a lot of places. And we all sort of the people who use it kind of just trust that the companies that are managing these stable coins, actually the issuers of them, actually have in their reserves, in their vaults, enough money, dollars, to back the stable coins that they put out into the universe. Now, they claim that they do, but do we know for sure that they do? What happens if everybody suddenly wants to turn in their USDC coin and they want to put it back into dollars again? Do we know that they'll be able to get their money back? This has been a real concern. So there's a lot of advantages to using stablecoins, but there's also some downsides to it. So the purpose of the Genius Act is to try to make these stable coins, put the government stamp of approval on them and say, yeah, we're going to regulate them. We're going to make sure that they're safe. And we're going to require that stablecoin issuers have a 1-to-1 reserve ratio for their stable coins, so that for everyone, USDC coin out there in the world, they have $1, so that they're not running. So there's never a situation where there's a run on USDC coin and you can't get your money back. That's how this is being sold. So it's going to make stable coins more attractive and more stable. And you're going to consumers and institutions, especially who otherwise might have stayed away from them because of the risks. How do we know we'll get our money back? How do we know these companies are reliable? Now they don't need to worry about that if this bill goes into effect. It hasn't been signed into law yet. So that's what the Genius Act is trying to do. So all of that sounds like, well, I don't know. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is there's a couple of things. The biggest one, I think, is that this could be a backdoor way for the Fed to somehow create a digital currency, because there's really nothing in the bill that prevents them from doing that. So maybe they could somehow figure out a way to take advantage of this and create a stable coin on the market that effectively acts like a dollar, and then people just start using it because it's backed by the Fed or something. So there's some people are concerned about that. I think that's a huge threat, a huge problem. I said that this was the biggest problem. Actually, take that back. I think the biggest problem is the corporate aspect of it. Essentially, what this does is create a corporate dollar. Okay, it's corporate. It's a private currency, and some libertarian types really like that idea. But as we've learned in recent history, with ESG, with the ESG and banking, with all kinds of other nefarious things that corporations have been doing, corporations are not always acting in your best interests as an individual person, and they're not always using their wealth and power to enhance your freedom. Sometimes they use it to restrict your freedom. And so one of the big concerns with the Genius Act is, by putting the government stamp of approval on this thing without building any protections in it for individual liberty, makes stablecoins really attractive for people and institutions to start using and spreading all over the world and creating more and more and more of them, and people become more dependent on them. But there's nothing stopping, say, BlackRock, which is one of the biggest investors in stablecoins, from demanding that stablecoins suddenly are no longer allowed to be used to purchase guns, for example, or that certain ideological views, those people who have those views and say nasty things on the internet that we don't like, they can't have our stable coins. Or maybe they can have them, but they can only use them for certain things. Or maybe you can have your stable coins, but we're going to take, we're going to build in some sort of function that penalizes you if you do certain things we don't like in the future. There's all kinds of really sort of nasty, bad, liberty-killing aspects to this that could be built into it. And I shouldn't say all, but many of the major investors in these technologies are pro-ESG people. They are people who have tried to do that kind of thing in other parts of the economy before. So why, if you're going to do this and you're going to put the government stamp of approval on it and say, no, everybody, you can trust these stable coins, you can trust them, then why not just put something in the bill that says, but you can't use stable coins, issuers, this is a rule for issuers. You can't use stable coins as a way of controlling people's behavior. They just have to be used as a free market, way to pay for things, but you can't build any sort of special rules into them that limit people's liberties or free speech or anything like that. Why not just put that in the bill? Why not just put that in the law? They didn't put that in the law, and now you've opened the door to, if these things become really, really popular with institutions and everybody starts using them, then there's really you'll find yourself in a situation someday, potentially, where ESG-like social credit scoring mechanisms are built into it. And by then they'll be so big and so influential and so popular that in effect, people's behavior will be controlled by this. And maybe there'll be some other alternative that you could use or whatever, but maybe those things are not popular, or maybe they're not as good for some reason, or maybe institutions don't like them and don't accept them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not hard to imagine a scenario where this becomes a really, really, really big problem. And the solution would have been very, very easy. Just build protections for individual liberty into the law. And even though Republicans are the ones pushing for this the hardest, they didn't do that. And it makes absolutely no sense at all. And I just want to say one more thing because I know I've been talking forever about it, but there's a libertarian argument in favor of this. And it's basically let the free market work and just get out of the way and let, if some companies want to put stable coins out there that discriminate against conservatives or liberals or whatever, that's fine, because some other company could come out and make a stable coin that doesn't do that. And then, you just go where the good stable coins are. This is like the libertarian argument. The problem is a truly libertarian position on this would be that the federal government does not get involved at all. They don't put their stamp of approval on it. They don't regulate it. They don't say, oh, you have to have a 1-to-1 reserve ratio. The risks of stablecoins should be built into the stable. That should be part of the decision-making process for whether you use them or not. In a truly libertarian system, you wouldn't have the government saying, we're going to back these stablecoins over here, but we're not necessarily going to put our stamp of approval on other kinds of cryptocurrencies or other things. That is not how a free market works. So I really, really think that this potentially could be a disaster in the long run. Not in the immediate term, because as long as Trump is in power, this probably is not going to happen. The regulators are not going to allow that to happen. But if a Joe Biden type comes back into the White House, or whoever was running the White House when he was there, bumbling around, you could have this be a vehicle, a public-private partnership type thing, where you've got the left controlling people's speech and behaviors and limiting access to guns and all kinds of other things that people on the right would be totally opposed to. And so that's the real threat danger here.
Yeah, and this piece of legislation is actually moving through Congress pretty fast at this point. Donald Trump posted about the importance of this bill earlier this week. The legislation went up for some sort of preliminary vote, I think on Tuesday, but failed because several members of the House Freedom Caucus voted against it. And they sent you that article. They were sounding some fears that this could lead to some sort of CBDCs sort of situation. So very similar to the warning that you and Glenn put out there. The latest I had on this, when I was just preparing some notes right before we went live, I got from Axios, is that members of the House Freedom Caucus were huddled in Speaker Mike Johnson's office for a while before signaling that they would change their vote and support the legislation. So I don't know whether that means that the fears were dispelled, whether they caved, whether additional language was added to the legislation to alleviate their concerns. I don't know. But supposedly there's another vote happening today. Could be happening right now for all I know. Justin, any insight into that little closed door meeting or anything else that's going specifically with this legislation right now?
I don't know what was promised to them to get them to feel better about it. But my concern is that the things that they talked about, from what I could tell, were not exactly, they dealt more with the first issue I brought up, but not the second issue. So they're concerned about this being used somehow to create a true central bank digital currency. But they're not necessarily focused on, we need to build in individual liberties into the, protection for individual liberties into the bill, so that when corporations use it or create these things, they can't use it to punish people either. That did not seem to be one of their issues, at least as from the reporting that I saw, that was the case. So whatever they negotiated, I'm guessing, had something to do with CBDCs and less to do with whether this will empower corporations someday to use these digital currencies as a tool to, change society. And that's really, for me, the thing I'm most worried about, because there are no constitutional protections from a corporation doing that. And if just all of the financial infrastructure suddenly becomes built on this superior product that is better than traditional banking, and the government has put its stamp of approval on it, and there's no protections for individual liberty, that get in the right context, these big corporations will use that power to appease whoever happens to be in the White House to do whatever it is that person wants. And we've seen that with the banking system already with ESG and these same kinds of people. And so if I didn't trust BlackRock 2 years ago or a year ago or last week, when it comes to ESG and banking and the financial system and Wall Street and how they've been using it for big corporations to tie money to what big corporations do and how that impacts society, why would I trust them to be in charge of a whole new currency? It doesn't make any sense at all. And again, it could have easily been fixed. And as far as I know, that has not happened. So we're going to see what occurs moving forward. But so far, it really does not look very good.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And this is kind of why we developed this Emerging Issues Center at the Heartland Institute, so that we could stay on top of issues like this. Because, even CBDCs in general, like maybe you've heard little snippets about there. I think a lot of our reoccurring guests in the chat understand it because they probably seen our stuff, listened to us talk about this sort of thing. And yeah, that idea is, I see one comment on there. You've been cut off from buying more pizza this month. You've used up your allotment. Uh, like that, or this idea that I know I've covered on this show in years past, of this idea that like the metadata of buying products could be encoded with the carbon footprint of said product, and if you overstay or overuse your carbon footprint or something like that, there's any number of ways that these things could be used to kind of control your purchasing decisions and just kind of society in general, pushing down certain industries while propping others up. So the threat of this sort of thing, I don't really even think can be overstated. But based on what we're just talking about and the new developments with all of this, I predict that we're going to be talking more and more about CBDCs and the threats of digital currencies, government-backed digital currencies, in the months and years to come. Let's move on, though. So this story, I think we can blaze through pretty quickly here. We're going to be talking about CSDDD, Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. We've been talking about this topic for years. This is essentially ESG, the corporate social credit score that incentivizes so-called woke and social, environmental, and politically conscious actions by companies. The back door, we've always referred to it as like a back door towards collectivist actions using corporate and financial power as opposed to government power. CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, is the mandated version of ESG in the European Union, but it is written in a way, and we don't have to go through all the specifics. I think a lot of people here are familiar with us enough based on our work. It's written in a way that would enforce this sort of backdoor collectivism on a global scale. Anyone that's doing business in Europe, anyone that's upstream, downstream in the supply chain of doing business in Europe would basically be forced to do this kind of ESG sort of scheme. So we've been exposing and fighting against this for years, as I said, and now, Justin, we can finally take some solace in the fact that there might be some pushback happening at the highest levels of government. So, Justin, you care to explain this exciting development in the ESG/CSDDD story?
Within the last year, there has been movement in Congress, in the House and the Senate, sort of sounding the alarm on this. Finally, I mean, it took a while to get them to see it, but they've been sounding the alarm about it for a while. Republicans mainly talking about how this is extremely problematic, not just from an individual liberty perspective, but also just from an economic perspective. You're talking about essentially imposing all kinds of costly regulations on U.S. businesses, telling them how they need to operate. It's a sovereignty issue. You know, you're forcing companies in the United States to change their business practices, not just in Europe, but in America and everywhere else in the world, in line with European rules and guidelines. So there's a sovereignty issue here. There's a huge regulatory cost issue. And so we've seen members of Congress in the House and the Senate start to produce letters and push back against this. But most recently, the sort of biggest news, because we've known for a while that in order to really solve this problem, you would need to have a president working with Congress to fight back against this. The simplest way to fight back against it is through trade agreements and through trade negotiations. And basically say to the European Union, hey, you're not going to do this to us, because if you do this to us, then we're just going to, slap a massive tariff on you, and we're going to destroy your economy, basically, because you're dependent on us for all sorts of things. And we're not going to allow you to do this to us. And we have not had a president, obviously, in the last 4 years up until Donald Trump that was willing to do that. In fact, Joe Biden and those people, they love this kind of thing. They want more globalism, and they love the European Union. And so they're all in on it. But we knew about 3 or 4 months ago, we found out that some of the top Trump officials coming into the White House at that time were opposed to this, including Jameson Greer, who's one of the sort of the head U.S. trade guy in the Trump administration, Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce. They came out and they basically said, we're going to push back against this. We don't like this. We're going to push back against it. But politicians say things all the time. Administration officials say things all the time. They don't necessarily do it. Well, now we have recent reporting that indicates that, yes, there is evidence now. We have reports from inside the White House that in the trade negotiations with the European Union, this is one of the big items that's being dealt with. They're going to the European Union and they're saying, look, you are going to change this. You are not going to impose the rules, at least not the way they're written now, on U.S. businesses, or you're going to pay the price for it. So that's a really, really, really positive sign, because that's basically the only way to fix the issue in the short term. You could pass a law in Congress, and some efforts have been attempted to do that this year, but they really haven't gone anywhere. It's still not a super hot button issue with voters. So until more people know about it, because I think if people know about it, they'll be all for passing a bill that would stop it. But until that happens, really, you need the president leading the charge on this. And that does appear to be happening now, finally. So this is a huge movement, a huge moment for the Trump administration, for the pro-liberty movement. Even if most people have never heard of CSDDD, it's maybe the most important issue right now in terms of threats to individual liberties for everyday Americans. So a massive victory there. And we're seeing reports from the European Union where heads of state in Europe are starting to say, you know what? Maybe we should just kill this whole thing. This is probably not a good idea, even though they just passed it a year ago. So, because Donnie said, we've been talking about this for years. We were talking about it while it was in the legislative process.
Right. Back when it was almost dead. Remember? We were like celebrating that it was dead, and then it came back to life.
It looked like it was going to die a year ago, right before it passed, but then it did pass into law a little over a year ago. And so it's a fairly new law. I mean, imagine it took years to put this together and pass it. Imagine taking years to pass a law, and then within a year you say, you know what? Maybe we should just get rid of that law. That is very uncommon, very, very uncommon. And the reason it's happening is 100% because the European Union is horribly afraid of what will happen with the Trump administration, and maybe with other countries too, if they go through with this. But I think that America and the Trump administration is the biggest reason why they're starting to talk about pulling back on it.
Well, yes, and the fact that you identified this a while ago, you were like the only person talking about this. We made this a big thing for the Emerging Issues Center at the Heartland Institute. We got Glenn Beck talking about it a lot. And you know what? Like, even our enemies are like piling, like credit of this demise of this thing on us, right? So I'll take the credit. I love taking the credit for pushing back against terrible things like this. So yeah, again, another thing that the Emerging Issues Center is really focused on is these ESG, CSDDD sort of schemes that it's, like I said, backdoor way of collectivism, trying to enforce this political policy agenda sort of stuff through these financial mechanisms, as opposed to just like government decree. In this case, it's both. So yeah, awesome. I hope that we can dance on the grave of this thing in the next few months. That would be fantastic. I think we'll be able to just retire from that after that. we'll just stick our flag in the grave of this thing and say, all right, folks, we helped save the world. We're going to go to sleep now, but there's too many other topics to talk about.
Nice.
So it does sound nice. All right, let's get to our kind of main topic, I guess. All of these things actually kind of relate to this, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But the idea of whether or not we are becoming a nation of renters. So this is one that kind of hits at the very core of the American dream. So I've noticed the reason why I'm actually specifically talking about this on this episode today. One, we had the opportunity to hijack the show, so we took that option. But earlier this week, I was driving to a dentist appointment, actually, and I heard Charlie Kirk talking about how he was at the Turning Point USA conference, some big shindig over this past weekend. And he said that he multiple times from multiple people, they were bringing up this idea of this nation of renters and this decline of home ownership in the United States and how this is affecting the youth more than other generations, that sort of thing. I also saw a clip of Tucker Carlson, I think, speaking at that same event, talking specifically about this idea of becoming a nation of renters. So because of all of that, I wanted to hop up on the bandwagon a little bit, especially because we were very early on this bandwagon. We've been talking about this since at least, 2023, when you and I, Justin, worked with Glenn Beck on the book Dark Future, right? That came out in 2023.
I think we were talking about this with Great Reset, probably.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
even
maybe it dates
before
back
that.
even further, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the issue is that we're drifting, and in some cases being shoved, towards what I call a rentership society. That's a world where regular people no longer own homes, but this also goes to cars, land, even content. Everything is being turned into where it's being leased, borrowed, even streamed from just a handful of corporations. And I believe that's going to have profoundly negative effects on society. This is an economic issue. It's a psychological issue. It's a cultural issue. It's even a spiritual issue. Ownership represents a financial milestone. It's a form of stability, autonomy, and dignity. You take all of that away and you create a society that's rootless and dependent and far easier to control. So, to be clear, I think that there are two main forces driving this trend. One is technological, things like the subscription model, digital platforms, even artificial intelligence, so-called sharing economy, all of that. The other is ideologically driven from like a global perspective. This is driven by international groups like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, who are using buzzwords like sustainability and equity and even climate justice to justify a future where you will own nothing and you'll be happy, right? So there's a couple of ways that we can approach this. One is from like the technological and kind of corporate force that's kind of pushing society in this direction. So the internet version of this story is that companies like BlackRock are buying up homes in huge quantities. This is nearly true. BlackRock does invest in companies that do this, but BlackRock itself doesn't. They actually have like a disclaimer webpage that specifically talks about like this misnomer that like they're the ones that are buying these houses in mass, when in actuality it's places like Blackstone. I understand the confusion. And Invitation Homes. They are corporations that do this, buying up massive amounts of homes just to turn them into rental properties. So these companies own millions of homes and apartment complexes. These corporations often outbid individual buyers, especially in the starter home market, driving up prices. And technology does facilitate this. These companies use sophisticated computer programs to find desirable homes moments after they're listed and put in prices, that are just above, what like the asking prices, things like that. And even like the logistics of a company acting as a landlord for millions of homes across the country simultaneously would basically be impossible like a couple of decades ago. But now everything is centralized. There's tenant apps, there's automated leases, there's AI-driven communications and eviction notices, all of that sort of stuff. Data pricing. Data-driven pricing allows rent to be maximized per market and tenant type. So there's a lot of technological aspects of this that make this sort of thing possible even. And then there's also the ideological and international organization kind of push towards this thing. So this sort of system is, or society, I guess, is promoted by organizations including the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, that sort of thing. The infamous "you'll own nothing and be happy" line is probably the most popular version of this sort of thing. Their Great Reset initiative explicitly called for a transformation of the ownership model. They talk endlessly about the sharing economy or the circular economy, that sort of thing. The UN Sustainability Development Goals push for sustainable cities, high-density living, and a push against suburban home expansion, single-family zoning, and private land use. All of this, of course, is justified under the guise of climate action as well. And relating to their other stories, you don't need a great imagination to see how artificial market force tools like ESG or digital currencies could be used to push society into this exact sort of living situation. It's that's very much inside the the realm of possibility when you're really talking about like the power that ESG has and the power that digital currencies have could really could incentivize this idea of rentership, make that much more of an advantageous thing as opposed to buying a house. And we've even talked about other articles out there. You'll see think pieces basically trying to convince people that they shouldn't buy a house and that you're even more free if you own a house. That way you don't have to worry about selling the house. You can just end your lease. Oh, you'll be so much happier if you just rent. And I'll get to some of the maleffects of a rentership society, but just on those couple of points that I was making here, between the corporate pressures, the technological pressures, the ideological international organizations that are pushing for this, do you have anything that you want to kind of add to those forces that are pushing us in this direction?
Well, I mean, the other big thing here is that the monetary policies that we've had in this country for a while have moved in that direction. The biggest reason that housing has increased in price is because the Fed has been printing massive amounts of money since the Obama days. And when you look at home prices in the basically pre-COVID period to post-COVID, or during even COVID, during that period, 2021 or so, I mean, they went up like on average $100,000, $150,000 in a few years.
Yeah,
I mean,
like 50%
insane.
or something. It's crazy.
Yeah, huge numbers. That was driven by them printing lots of money and putting that into society, putting it into the financial system. And a lot of that money ended up in property because there was nowhere else to put it. That made a lot of sense for people. And a lot of people wanted to move out of cities. And so a lot of people were buying houses and all of that. And then when the Fed realized, oh, actually, this whole inflation thing isn't transitory and we have an inflation problem, they jacked up interest rates. And interest rates also contributed to the issue because then nobody wanted to sell their house because they would then have to go buy a house for a much higher interest rate and their payment would be a lot higher. And so people who want to sell their homes are just sitting on their homes because they don't want to buy another home at an interest rate that's 2 to maybe 3 times even what they paid. And so this housing thing is getting totally out of control. Producer Andy, pull up the chart that I was telling you about in the chat. There's this incredible chart. This is one of the most incredible charts. It does not get talked about enough. This is the home price, the average home price in America related to the median household income. Okay. So essentially what this is showing is how much income do you have to make in how many years of salary do you have to earn to, pay for your house if you put every single dollar toward it, right? So it gives you a sense of how much homes are costing relative to how much people are making. And what you see in this chart as you look is over the years throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way up to 2000, when they really started to get into the money printing thing, it was somewhere between 4 and 5 times. So that means you had to earn 4 to 5 times your income. That was roughly the price of a house. Then it started going crazy. Okay. After the dot-com bubble burst, they started lowering interest rates and they put more money into the economy, and you got the housing bubble, and it got close to 7 times your income, the average house of a home, 7 times your income. And then the housing market collapsed. And then they pumped more money into it in COVID. And what happened? It jumped up over 7 during Biden. And it's now well above 7. It's the highest it's ever been. It's worse today than the housing bubble, the big Great Recession housing bubble in the George W. Bush era into the Obama era. That was better than what we're seeing right now. And so it has never been, I guess this is the way to say it. What this shows is it has never been more unaffordable for people to buy a home than today. This is the worst it's ever been. And this does not, keep in mind, this chart is only prices. It doesn't factor in how much you have to pay because of interest rates.
Right.
So when you factor in the interest rates on top of it, the interest rates are much higher today than they've been over the past 15, 20 years. It is astronomically more expensive today to buy a home.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that, so it's not just that the supply is being eaten up. That's a big part of it too. But even when you're in a market where maybe you don't have big corporations buying up homes everywhere, just the other monetary policy issues, the interest rates, the amount of money printing that's occurred over the past several years, trillions of dollars being put into the financial system, all of that has driven up the price of a home too, and it's completely unaffordable. So it's harder to buy a home because big corporations are buying homes, and it's harder to buy a home because the monetary system has made it. The Fed has basically created this problem. And then on top of all of that, you have environmental regulations.
Yes.
In states all over the country where they've basically made it impossible for people to build new homes.
Exactly.
Even
Right.
if they want to. So all of this is coming together to create conditions where for a lot of people, it doesn't make sense to buy a house anymore. You can't afford it.
No, it's like so many different factors coming together to like really bring this issue to a head. I was going to bring up that like zoning, all of these different zoning and red tape issues that prevent new home building, all of that. Like that's like an old story that people have been talking about for 30 years, probably even longer than that. But then even when you were talking about what caused the housing bubble, the first that popped in like 2008 or whatever, there was a whole bunch of terrible policy that like you didn't even mention that like dates back to like Clinton era, trying to get as many people into homes as possible with these like subprime mortgages and these quotas and all of that sort of stuff. I think we talked about that extensively in with Glenn Beck on the Arguing with Socialists book, like back in whatever year that came out. So there's so much of this all happening, in addition to all the things that I mentioned before you even started talking, that like just has been pushing this all in one direction: higher home prices and less access for people to get a home. So yeah, all of that is a huge thing, but it also has all of these societal mal effects that I want to talk about next. So the loss of autonomy. So this is one that I've been a very vocal critic of when it comes to any of this stuff. Any of this like you'll own nothing sort of stuff. This goes from like cars to, you know, even when you're streaming stuff on Netflix, as opposed to like putting a DVD in your DVD player, including housing, is that when you don't own the thing, you don't get to control it. Somebody else does. They make the rules. I've been saying this for years, right? So there's some scene. We'll just take it at the least important out of all the topics that I'm talking about. There's some scene in a movie or a TV show that's considered offensive. Well, Netflix or whoever could just take it out. You know, they could just take it out. So now when you watch that movie, that scene is gone. Even if that's one of the funniest scenes or the most impactful scene or whatever, you don't own it. Like they can't go into your house and take your DVD, but they can change the content that you're streaming because they own it. You don't. And the same thing goes for homes, right? You don't own it. They make the rules. They get to make all the decisions, that sort of thing. There's also like psychological impacts when it comes to this that have to do with stability and you feeling like kind of rooted to your community, because when you don't own a home, you don't really care as much, right? It's not your investment. If you're not like taking care of the leaves on the roof and the roof is getting worn out, that's the landlord has to worry about that. That multiplied by 100, because there's a million different examples of that sort of thing. In fact, I just saw like a meme on like Facebook just the other day where it was like, oh, one of the least talked about benefits of renting a home. And it was just a picture of like someone pouring oil down their like their sink or something because they don't care, right? So that's the landlord's problem, it's not mine. And then there's also kind of that wealth aspect of it, because buying a home is, for most people, the biggest investment that they're ever going to make in their life. And it's a vehicle for wealth. A lot of people have their retirement based on the increased valuation of their homes over time. All of that sort of stuff, all of it's gone. All of the control gone. You're feeling rooted to the community gone once we go into this rentership society model. And you can get into the conspiracy theories about whether or not some of that's intentional and what if they're driving this for further control of society. You don't even, I love to go that far, but you don't even have to go that far when it comes to the maleffects of all of this. So it's a huge issue, and it's actually one that, like, as I've been thinking about it more ever since my drive to the dentist and talking or thinking about this, listening to like Charlie Kirk and reflecting on all the work we've done on it in the past, I've been thinking, like, this is probably something that we should pay more attention to. Like, maybe this is something that we kind of like set up a project about in the Emerging Issues Center, specifically talking about this, because it does affect younger generations disproportionately. People that are trying to finally get a foothold, finally trying to get a piece of land, so that they could start building their family. All of that sort of stuff, I feel like disproportionately affects younger generations. So it's something that I feel pretty passionate about, and I think something that needs to be addressed by more people than who are in the conversation today. Justin, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, people have talked about owning a home is the American dream. And I've heard some people say, well, that's not really true. And for a lot of people, it doesn't really make sense to own a home and blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that going all the way back to people getting on boats, millions and millions of people, and coming from Europe to America, a big part of that was you couldn't really own a lot of property or any property in many European countries if you were just a lower income or even what you would think of as middle class person. It just wasn't possible. Most of the land was already owned. You had aristocrats owning huge, massive plot farms and things like that, and plantations all over the world. And like, it just wasn't accessible to regular people. But in America, you could come here and you could buy land and you could build a house on it, and land was cheap, and you could just become a farmer here and have your own property. And people today don't really think much of that, because most people don't want to be farmers and they don't want to necessarily own a big piece of land and all of that stuff. But back in that time, that was like the greatest thing that could ever happen to you. Was right. You get to have your own piece of land, and no one tells you what to do. And you're not a tenant farmer anymore, where some lord is telling you how to, is going to take a cut of everything that you make for him, or that the crops you bring in, like all the old medieval system from Europe that had lasted for a very, very long time. That was all gone. And you could now become a landowner, and land meant wealth. And land still means wealth. It's still one of the most stable ways to have long-term wealth. And and one of the most overlooked parts of it too, I think, arguably the most important part of it is because a lot of people will say, well, you know what? If you rent, you save a lot of money because you don't have to fix up your home all the time and deal with all the crap that comes with that. And I'm a homeowner, and it is terrible. Sometimes you do have to spend a lot of money fixing things up, and it's a big pain, and I get it, right? But one of the biggest advantages is a lot of people who rent, they don't actually just take the excess money and then they save it and then they build this giant portfolio and then they're millionaires in 20 years. What they do is they spend it. And the thing about wealth in a home is it's really hard to spend the wealth that's tied up into your house. So it's like a savings account that you can't touch for retirement. And it grows in value over time just by the very nature of a home becoming more valuable. And so it's a really, really good way. You can't it's really hard to mess it up if you buy a home and you live in it for 20 or 30 years, you will make money on that home in the vast majority of cases.
Right.
And you'll be able to use it as a retirement, basically as a way to retire later on. And so it is so important for reasons related to liberty, for wealth building, for retirement, for all of these things. And it is rapidly dying. I would say slowly dying, but it's not. It's rapidly dying. And just last point, this opens the door. And this is something that I think free market people need to be very concerned about. A whole generation of people feel like they can't buy a house.
Right.
And they feel like the system is rigged against them and that their parents had it better than that they did. And that they are not going to be able to build a life like the one they lived in, that they grew up in. Their lives are worse than when they were little kids. That is not normal for Americans. Most Americans think my life is way better than it was when I was a kid. Like that's how most Americans generationally have thought. And now what we're doing is giving a whole generation of Americans, you know what? Your life is worse. Sorry. You don't have as much wealth. You don't get to live in a big house. You have to be subject to a landlord forever. At some point, the political backlash of that could very easily become, well, we should just take it from the people who have it because this whole system is unfair.
Zoran Mamdani, right?
The whole system's unfair. The richer people and older people, they control all the property and wealth. And if you think this sounds like kind of crazy, basically every socialist society that has ever existed started because of something like this, where there was this sense that we can't build wealth or have property the way that other people do. So we need to, and the system is so corrupt, I'll never be able to do it. So we just got to take it from them and start all over. Exactly. And there are lots of people on the left who think that way already. And it won't take much to tip things over for a lot of the sort of, Trump Democrat types who are kind of in the middle, but are not necessarily hardcore free market conservative libertarian types. I think this is a huge, huge problem, especially with the AI revolution and all the job disruption and stuff that might come from that. This is a huge, huge problem that we have to get fixed.
Yeah. And like I said, the idea of not feeling as kind of rooted in your home and feeling responsibility over your home when there's a landlord that's supposed to be doing all of that stuff. The same thing could apply to just your community. You don't feel as much attached to the community. And above that, just the country itself, right? If you don't have a stake in the ground, you feel less about the future of the society. All of this, very important stuff. It's, like I said, emerging issues. I think we're going to be paying more attention to all of this sorts of stuff. So definitely be keep an eye if you're interested in this. Keep an eye on this show where these topics are discussed on a weekly basis. Same time, Thursdays at noon Central Time. You can go to heartland.org and find a whole bunch of the work that we're doing at the Emerging Issues Center right there. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
You can go to X and basically every other social media platform and find me at Justin T. Haskins.
Fantastic. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this episode. If you like the show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. You can, like I said, you could find us on all of the different places. You can't, donate any money to us through super chats or anything like that because YouTube has demonetized us. But you can go to heartland.org/inthetank and donate directly to that. But give us a like, share this content, put a comment under the video. All those things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.